intro.
I love that
All right,
intro.
y'all.
Yeah.
Welcome to the last page with DMoss. We are on today with an old friend. He is a composer, bassist, vocalist, and sonic architect. His name is Heshima Moja. He's an artist whose work defies genre. It blends tradition, innovation, and whose latest project, The Healing Suite, offers a powerful music meditation for our times. Heshima, welcome to the show.
Hey, D, thank you so much. It's so great to be here. I haven't seen you in a minute.
It has been a while. Well, I'm down in Georgia now, so I'm away from everybody. I'm living the quiet life. No more of the loud, let's cause some trouble, make some music type noise. So
I
I think
love
I
it.
finally grew up.
Well, don't
It
grow up.
is.
Stay a kid.
So talk to me. Let's dive right in. Let's talk about the world of sound, spirit, and storytelling. Your bio speaks to your journey shaped by cultural heritage, visionary foresight. What were some of the early musical and cultural influences that shaped you?
I have such a wide palette of influence. Um, but I think that in terms of what really makes me who I am, the essence of who I am, and anybody who really has seen me develop over the decades. I hate to say that, that's painful to say, but over the decades, um, I have to really give honor where honor is due, and talk about my influences from the early days of playing in churches, in the Springfield area and in the Connecticut area, playing in churches. So the Black American sacred experience for me is pivotal. And then, of course, um, as a young musician evolving, my foundation is in jazz, or what we call jazz, what I tend to call Black classical music. But so the older musicians that were around me, the Billy Arnolds, the Avery Sharps, the Vishnu Woods of my immediate area growing up, who helped really expose me to not just the musical influence of jazz, but the cultural, the lifestyle influence of jazz. So what it meant to be, in their explanations of their lived experiences, um, a jazz musician, and then me taking from that and them really saying, if you're going to play this music, you also have to dive into the culture, into the lifestyle, into the history, into the sociological realities of this music. So I would say that jazz and blues, coupled or adjacent to the church experience. So essentially the Black American experience, and then stretching out and starting to travel through those genres of music, and really diving into the Afro-Caribbean experiences and other African diasporic experiences.
Right, right. So almost when you're talking about jazz, blues, gospels, it's almost like blurred lines. Where does one end and the other begin?
Right, right.
Yeah. I remember, if I can go back some decades with you,
Decades, man.
the early venues that we had. Yeah, I think you've. I've heard you sing the blues. I've heard you play the blues. I've heard you play jazz.
Yep.
Um, First time I heard you sing a gospel cut, whew, another story. But anyways,
Yeah,
let's move
yeah,
on. You've collaborated with legends across R&B, jazz, hip hop. Just global music. Period.
yeah.
How has those experiences expanded your own sonic identity?
Well, I wasn't going to get philosophical so early, but Octavia Butler, one of her famous quotes is, "Whatever you touch, you change.
Okay.
Whenever you change, changes you." So I think that every single time that I've been um, fortunate enough to step into an experience with another type of artist, whether it's a jazz artist, an R&B artist, a hip hop artist, a world music artist, those experiences either push me towards something new,
Okay.
or pull me into a whole other realm. So when I first started touring at the international level, it was with Patti LaBelle, and honestly, I knew nothing about the R&B world up to that point. I thought I knew about the R&B world, but stepping into that space and working with an icon and working with the amazing musicians around her forced me to begin to shift my whole view of how audiences engage with music, um, how what the real life of an artist is. You know, as a jazz musician, I romanticized a lot of things, and I think you'll remember those early days with me. You know, it was a real romanticized idea, like I'll die for my art. If I have to live in a gutter, I'll die for my art. And I go from that to working with an icon who around the world people revere, and so there's a certain level of expectation musically, and so that particular experience forced me to really reckon with, am I really as good as I say?
Mm.
You know, where do I really have to step up? So those types of experiences, more so than just the amazing pride that one feels of being able to step into experiences like that, is the growth. And you also learn not only what you have to add to your musical toolbox, but you learn what really doesn't matter. So, you know, I came out of music school, right? And so I thought,
Mhm.
oh, I have to be this technical wizard and I have to know all this stuff. And I step into an experience with a Patti LaBelle who steps up 5 minutes before a show and says, I don't like these background vocals. Change them now. Here, you sing this note, you sing this note. Recognizing that Miss Patty had no formal musical training. Miss Patty was just a genius, right? And
Right.
so being able to realize, okay, what I thought was important about my musical development wasn't necessarily so important. And then I take that experience into the next experience, working with La India. And then that's salsa. That has nothing to do with R&B. So all of a sudden I have to shelve those things and I have to learn a whole new skill set and discard some other things. And then I moved to another artist, which happened to be, I got a chance to work with Guru very shortly, the rapper Guru and Jazzmatazz. And so, you know, then that's a whole other set of things. So each experience forces one to shed skin and also to figure out what I can take along on the journey and keep in the toolbox for a later time. And then it just, these influences always pop up later on in the art, in the act of creation.
Okay. And I'm going to throw in a curveball. You also, when we look at, I'm from that spoken word world.
Yeah.
Talk about your impact in terms of what that whole spoken soul sound, how that whole spoken soul sound shaped, without referencing what we did together.
Right.
You were a major influence in terms of what spoken word looked like from the region we came from, which is completely different than that open mic scene. You can't find. I'm in Atlanta, and I don't even find it here. So talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that you know, I was really fortunate that you brought me to the scene at a point where it was developing, right? At least in New England, right? If we're talking specifically about the region we were working in at that time.
Right.
And at that time it was really either the dry poets, the poets who just really didn't rock with music at all, or you had poets who were really trying to recreate some, I don't know, I guess really kind of close to the beat poetry thing, right? They were trying to do the avant-garde jazz thing, or and and so being able to then add my experiences into the spoken word scene, which we started eventually calling, I think, the spoken soul scene, right? Which was
Right.
the idea of word and music together. And before I realized it, because I didn't come from that spoken word world, I didn't realize the types of people that were showing up in New England to rock on those stages, because they also, even coming from New York, right, coming from Jersey, they weren't doing that type of thing where they were rocking with soul music, or where they were rocking with musicians who could create on the spot and respond, right, to what the artists were doing, you know. And so I think it's really a privilege for me when I look back 30 years and realize that I was part of the creation of a new subgenre right? I guess we could call it,
Yeah.
and of spoken word, which really did impact, because everything you touch, you change, and everything you change changes you. Those artists came to those New England spots and then brought that concept back to where they were going, and they attempted to do it. And that's the way that artistic movements grow,
Right.
right? Someone comes, they're influenced, and then they bring that influence back. And even if they don't necessarily do it the exact same way, they attempt to do it. And before you know it, you have this whole movement of artists who are attempting to recreate what they've experienced in the space that you happen to be a curator of,
Right.
but also an artist, right? Honing that craft, that skill set in those spaces. And we had some amazing artists come through, you know, the Mahogany Browns and the Queen Shebas and the Ty Allens and they've gone on to, you know, do their own thing.
Right.
But a lot of them got that start or ended up creating albums, right? Creating bodies of work based
Right.
upon that,
You got
that experience, you know?
Right.
So I think it's really an honor for me to think that I've in some way contributed to a legacy.
And you did. And I bring that up as you talk about how you go from genre to genre and how you grab elements. I bring up, and I brought it up because as you're talking, as you were learning new things, you were bringing it back to the folks in the poetry scene, teaching us about, listen, you can't, you know, you, you can't do this. It has to be done in the structure. You have to structure it this way. And you were teaching as the show was going on. So for
Yeah.
that, I say thank you. Looking back 30 years, it's kind of like we learned a lot.
Well, and vice versa, right? Because if we look now at, for instance, jazz, the world I tend to live in, right?
Right.
I look at Grammy-winning jazz albums or Grammy-nominated jazz albums, and spoken word is a pivotal part, right, of those albums. I was just, you know, I was talking to the saxophonist Lakeisha Benjamin not too long ago, and her latest album, Phoenix, I mean, she's got Angela Davis on the record, and she's got some other amazing spoken word artists, or I just think about all of these jazz artists who are now incorporating this, and this is 20 or 30 years later, right? And so that influence, and so I guess we never really know when we're doing the work,
right?
You know, which has been one of the biggest lessons for me, because I won't make any type of show. I won't try to hide the fact that as an artist, we all want to live forever. We all want to be remembered. We all want to be. And so in the earlier part of my career, it was like, who can I work with? And why is this not happening? And why are people not recognizing me? And what's wrong with me? And you got a Daryl Moss sitting in the back saying, why are you worried about what people are thinking? Just get up and play the music, get up and sing, right? But I've learned over the years that there are times when we can put in the work, and it's like farming, I guess, right? You can plant the seeds in the winter, but if you're expecting some corn in January, you're not going to get it, at least not up north, right? So it's going to come when it's going to come.
Right.
People are going to see the result of that work when it comes, when it's meant to come, however one wants to frame that, right?
Absolutely. Okay. And it takes us to where we are now, your latest project. I mean, wow, over the years, it's amazing being able to sit on the periphery and watch how you evolved in like 5 different directions. And I think it's amazing. So as I listened to your latest project, The Healing Suite, it feels more than an album. It really feels like it's an invitation into a ceremony.
Yeah.
What inspired The Healing Suite? Talk about that.
So The Healing Suite, I started writing in the middle of the pandemic. I had left New York because it just wasn't sustainable with no one working, right? So I had a friend in Philly who needed a roommate. So I escaped to Philadelphia for a couple of years because I love Philly. And while I was in this room, right, in this apartment with my roommate, and she's at one end, I'm at the other end. She was also a musician, so she was creating, and I'm creating. And I started thinking about a lot of things, right? I was thinking about, Philadelphia. Anybody who knows Philadelphia knows it's not an easy place. There's a lot of nuances in the ways that people move in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Racially, it's problematic, right? And so I was thinking about how Black and brown folks were being asked to trust a system that has historically been untrustworthy. Is not even the word. Evil is the word, right? Toward the Black and the brown body, and asking Black folks once again to trust. Oh yeah, just take this shot because we really want what's best for you, right? And so people dying. At one point, there was a homeless encampment in the middle of downtown Philadelphia with hundreds and hundreds of people, right? Mostly Black and brown folks. And so I'm thinking about not just what does this mean in terms of the immediate effect, this vaccination business and that debate, but what does that bring up for people, right? What does that bring on the epigenetic level? What does that bring up in terms of ancestral trauma? The things that the traumas, the memories that live in the cells of Black folks who over and over and over again have been the subject of experimentation, right? And so that was the first kind of thought. And so I started writing, and really it wasn't even musical. It was more just reflections. I was doing a lot of journaling, and then I started writing. Then I started writing music, thinking about the fact that as I started to travel kind of mid-pandemic and things opened up in Europe, and I was watching the ways that people in other places were responding to and engaging with this pandemic. And then George Floyd gets murdered, right? And thousands of Black folks, Black men and women are being murdered by the police, right? In the middle of all of this. And it brought me back to the fact that aside from my musical acumen, I've always been deeply involved in Africana studies and things of that nature, right? It's actually how our friendship began, right? Sitting in a cafe, having conversations about a lot of these issues.
Yep.
So I started to go back and I'm rereading and I'm saying, wait a second, this is too familiar. This is a pattern. And so as I started to look from an interdisciplinary lens, I started realizing, yeah, people are talking about healing, and people are talking about racial healing, and people are talking about all kinds of healing, but they're just talking. What are they really doing that responds on a real visceral level, on a palpable level to begin to facilitate healing? So I started writing, and the first song that I wrote was this song called Release, which was talking about, or talks about, the importance of releasing not only the trauma from the body, but releasing the thoughts that we've been indoctrinated with, that cause us to move in particular ways. No matter how evolved we say we are, we end up falling into the same patterns because we've allowed that indoctrination to become part of our core belief system, at least in this modern era. And the people that resist that, how they're othered, or how Toni Morrison would say, they're made the foreigner, right? Right. And so then Release was the first song I wrote. And honestly, because I'm not a great piano player, I would sit at the piano every day. And when I wrote it originally, I think it sounded like a church song, right? But it was me playing some chords and me writing some lyrics. And then George Floyd was murdered. And so the second song that I wrote, it's called What Would You Do? But What Would You Do is very different, because while I'm talking about racial healing, we often think, or focus on, okay, so racial healing for for black folks, because black folks are the primary historical object of white supremacy and anti-blackness, right?
Right.
But then at this time while I'm writing, I'm interfacing with our mutual friend and brother Iyaba Mandingo, and he's painting a series at that time where he had taken lynching photos, black and white lynching photos from archives, and then juxtaposed the characters in the photos. So white folks became the objects of the lynching. White folks became the objects of being stoned, beaten by the police. Black folks laughing at. He's asking the question, what if we were like you? And so I start writing this song called What Would You Do? And it's directed at white America, which is, what would you do if it was happening to you? It's easier for you to brush off. You can shut off the news and say, I don't want to see that anymore, right? But folks, what kind of triggers were happening for black folks? What kind of triggers were happening for indigenous folks who are remembering? These are memories that are being brought up in the cells, right?
Right.
And the memory's not here. The memory is here. It's in the body. So,
and not even just the memories. My dad is the grandson of a slave.
right.
You understand what I'm saying? So
Yes, you have actual histories. You have actual
so some of these
connections to actual
stories
history.
that we've actually heard from our parents, our grandparents, and if we were blessed, our great grandparents. So there are people still around who had to feel that experience in terms of how it shaped the family values and. But anyway, that's a social political conversation. We talk about
Yeah.
your music. Go ahead.
But it's all connected. For me, it's all connected, and that's the point, right? I think that artists have historically been told to stay away from those things. Just make your music, sing your songs, shut up, right? Yep. Because why? Because art possesses art, music in general, right? As a broad, sweeping thing, in ways that no speeches, no classes can ever really get across the idea of how much power art has to transform people, to push them in a direction where maybe they were normally silent, but they feel inspired by something. They're lifted up by something. And so the Healing Suite for me was really about this idea of how do I reach the average person who's never read a book on social philosophy, on revolutionary thought, who doesn't know who Angela Davis is, who doesn't know who Steve Biko is, or who Patrice Lumumba is, or doesn't know who any of these people are. How do I reach them in a way where they say, wait a second, I got to take a thought because this song or this piece of music hit me in a way. I'm feeling something. I don't know what the heck I'm feeling, but I'm feeling something based upon that piece of art. And so my thought process was, I want to write this. And it started out, honestly, right? The word suite has particular implications artistically for those who are deep, generally associated with this European art form, a dance form, right? And I always remembered Magdalena Gomez telling me every culture has its own classical music. So I said, I'm going to reappropriate this term suite, and I'm going to apply it to this music, which is classical and very elevated in terms of its complication, in terms of its complexity, but also that has been hidden, that has been stolen. And so I wanted to start to draw from this idea also that for, at least in the black sacred traditions, in the black music traditions, I was always taught by my mentors, and it was always instilled in me, in black culture, whether we're talking about it on the African continent or throughout the diaspora, there is no such thing as a separation from the sacred and the profane, right? As the Europeans would define the profane, the secular, right? Everything is a ritual. And so for me, I started working from this idea that I want to create a sonic ritual. I want to create something that, yes, people may be able to sit back to and listen to it, but at the same time, they get pulled in. And I love how you use that language. They get drawn in, they get invited in to be able to participate on whatever level they feel an access point to in the music.
Okay, so here's what I want to do.
Okay.
I want to play Release. Is that cool?
That's wonderful.
All right, let's get to it. What you're about to hear, introduce it. I'll let you do it.
So this is the first song I wrote from the Healing Suite. It's called Release. It's drawing on some very, for me, very clear influences, the influences of people like Marcus Miller and Michelle Ndegeocello. But it would be considered a jazz piece, but some people might call it soul music. And it's really just about giving yourself permission to release those things that do not serve you in terms of your own journey to be your highest and most authentic self.
Okay, here we go.
Release your fears and you will find the truth you always seek has always been inside. Your heart is waiting to be your guide if you just let it go. Release the past and you will see the path is open, you're already free. You're the only one who can create your destiny if you just let it flow. Release, 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 and let it go. Breathe deep, breathe deep, breathe deep, and let it flow. Surrender to the truth you seek, 'cause your heart already knows. We've all been taught to see the world is I instead of we, doing what we're told 'cause they tell us so, but that doesn't work for you or me. It's time to look inside, look in the mirror, look into your eyes. What do you see? And what secrets do you keep that nobody knows? Release, 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 and let it go. Breathe deep, breathe deep, breathe deep, let it flow. Surrender to the truth, 'cause your heart already knows. 'Cause your heart already knows. Let go, breathe deep, release. 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 Release, 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 and let it go. Breathe deep, breathe deep, just let it flow. Surrender to the truth you see, 'cause your heart already knows. Release, 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 and let it go. Breathe deep, breathe deep, breathe deep, just let it flow. The truth you speak, 'cause your heart already knows.
I like.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
I like. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I was really fortunate. That one last year when I released it as the first single off the album, went to #1 on the Urban Influencer charts, and so I was really happy. My first #1 on a chart, right, on the
Wow.
national chart. So
Okay.
I was really happy that it had that type of impact.
Okay. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I'm sure it won't be your last, that's for sure. I love the vibe. I love the sound of that. And we have two more we're going to play before the show is over.
Okay.
We'll move on with some questions.
Sure.
You describe your performances as sonic rituals. What exactly does that mean to you?
So, leaning more and more as I grow as a person, I think about the fact that as a historian, when I look at music, I think about how music starts off generally as a creation in the American context within the Black community. If we're looking at soul music or the blues or jazz or gospel or any art form, because all American music is Black music. And so when I think about how the music starts out, but then I think about the pushback, right, from white supremacy and from the agents of white supremacy who understand the power of this music, not only to create collaboration across racial lines, but the reality is that the messages and the spiritual and social impact of the music as a way to inspire people to rebel and to push back against white supremacy and against oppression, that's a threat to the status quo. And so narratives are always spun, right? Counter narratives are always spun about the dangers of this music, the ills of this music, and then whatever respective musical art form is usually appropriated, and then it's turned into a business, right? So Black folks have historically created it, and then white folks get rich off of it once they whitewash it. And there's really no art form that hasn't happened to in the American musical context. But before there was this music industry, regardless of where people come from, because everyone is indigenous to somewhere, right?
Right.
People sat around in the living room next to the piano, or they sat next to the fire, or they sat in a communal circle. Whatever that cultural context is, every person on this planet has some connection to these types of rituals, these types of traditions. Those traditions get removed because in a capitalistic society, I know I'm not supposed to be like super political, but in a capitalistic and an individualistic Western model, the idea of connectedness is frowned upon because that's a threat to the system. So the focus on individualism, which takes us out of those communal experiences with art and with music, which is why the church, for instance, as a social vehicle is so important, because not that spiritually it necessarily means what people say it means, but socially it allowed people to connect, it allowed people to organize, it allowed people to begin to think about how do we do this together. We're not standing alone against oppression, right? And there are other ways in which that manifests, but that pulling back together of people in a space, right? So I'm thinking a lot about spaces these days when I think about my work. How do we take spaces that were traditionally not open and welcoming to Black and brown bodies, and how do we reappropriate those spaces and occupy those spaces and transform on a metaphysical or a spiritual level, on a social level? How do we transform those spaces into sites of ritual? How do we return to the sacred circle? In Taino culture, it would be called the areto, right? But the idea of Ubuntu, which is really central in my work, Ubuntu, that I am because you are, I am because they are, I am, this interconnectedness. And so ritual for me means, how do I step into a space, and while people are paying maybe to go to a concert, They don't realize that they're also being invited to connect and feel what connectedness can be like after so many years of being convinced that we have to do everything on our own. The mentality and the ideology of toxic late stage capitalism and the grind, doing it on our own and look out for yours and don't care about anybody else. Music and art is the one thing that can push back against that and begin to reconnect us. And so that's what I think about with song.
Okay. Understood.
Yep.
All right. So next question: what role does intention and spirituality play in your performances and compositions? And I think you just kind of answered that.
Yeah.
You talked about the ritualistic purpose or premise behind your music.
Yeah, but intention for me is everything, right?
Okay.
So intention for me is going to help me shape the program, whatever I'm curating. Right?
Okay.
If my intention is to get people to forget about things, then I'm going to curate a whole program which is based upon distraction.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with distraction, right? But if my intention is to help people experience joy in spite of current circumstances, then that's a different type of creation of a program. If my program is to get people angry, then I'm going to curate a whole different set of music, and I'm going to present that music in a whole different way. So I think that intentionality is really important. And for me, again, being so strongly influenced by African diasporic spiritual thought, right? Mm-hmm. There is no separation between sacred and secular. So a spiritual experience can happen any day of the 7 days of the week, unlike what the Western model of spirituality tells us, that we all have to gather in one place on a particular day of the week because some deity has told us that. That's contrary to the way that I live my life. Spirituality is everywhere. You can have a ritual in the middle of the grocery store buying fruit and vegetables. It doesn't matter what it is. So spirituality plays a role in everything. It's because spirituality for me implies that I'm thinking about other people and the effect that I have on other people, and the effect that I want to have on other people, versus being very laissez-faire about things and just saying, hey, I'm here to do a job. I'm here to play some music. I don't care what happens when people leave here. I want people to take the music away. I want it to be resonating inside of them, right? And I want it to be provoking something inside of them, provoking thought, provoking discomfort if need be, right? So it plays a role in everything that I do.
Which is where that spirituality comes in. People think of spirituality in the Christian context. Jesus or Christ. But spirituality really means just the touching of souls and finding out where everything is interconnected and finding that interconnectivity. That's what music used to do before they eliminated the spirituality from music. So I get you. Yeah. So we have about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we get everything in.
Sure.
Because I feel like I need to have a follow-up conversation with you just about all this other stuff right outside the music. But the critical piece is people don't understand that this is what music is really about. So someone watching may say, well, he's getting super philosophical and he's talking about the ethereal and he's talking about this, but that's us. That's life. That's who we are, which is why sometimes we're attracted to a painting or we're attracted to a certain type of music, depending on our moods. If there's no spiritual connection in your music, everything becomes distraction. And, anything not done in moderation is unhealthy. So, but go ahead.
No. So, for me, there's a couple of things. One, I understand that, and I've come to understand in that whole process of why am I not reaching these people? Why are these people not recognizing me? That everybody has a lane, right? Everybody's mission is going to reach a different group of people based upon the level of consciousness that they find themselves at in the moment. I may not be a person's cup of tea who doesn't want to think about these questions. That's okay, right? I may not be their cup of tea right now. And then just recently, D, I was back and I was listening to the whole Charles Mingus catalog. And so, you know, when I was 20, I listened to Mingus and I loved Mingus, but I loved Mingus for a different reason. At 54, Charles Mingus, I hear things in his music that there was no possible way at 20 years old that I would ever be able to really decipher and discern, right? So it also means that somebody may pick up the Healing Suite or the Awakening or whatever I do 10 years from now and say, why did nobody know about this guy? Well, some people knew about this guy. You just didn't know about this guy. So I think that's really an important, thing to consider, is that everybody's going to reach a different group of people.
When an artist, like I watched, we got, Ayaba Mending, a mutual acquaintance.
Yeah.
I've watched him paint. When I remember being on the college campus, when we were shutting down buildings, we're protesting, and Ayaba would be down in the student center painting.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing. He was always, and it's kind of like, I think when it comes to music, how can I say this? Painters paint, and they don't care what the world thinks.
Right.
They can care less. It's like they have an image that they need to get on canvas. They have to get out their head. I feel like musicians are the same way. So for me, it's kind of like, okay, DMoss doesn't like your music today, but then who knows? The music may not be meant for me. And I think when we do things with intention and with purpose, the people who are supposed to hear it, they're going to hear it. James Baldwin, oh my God. The way you talk about Mingus, I'm like that with Baldwin. I love Baldwin.
Yeah.
Now I love Baldwin because I'm listening to his speeches and they just resonate. It's almost like the message will find the person with that particular purpose.
That's right.
Period. So I think the most important thing we can say to young creators is just create. Don't worry about, we talk about music industry. Man, get away from the industry. We're not factories.
Right.
A creative should be a creative. And sometimes we get these downloads from the universe or wherever it comes from. And I've watched you. I've seen you when you play with your bass and you're just like, sometimes you're in another world. And your head is going and music, it's like, what is that? I don't know. I'm trying to work on something. I keep hearing it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we get these downloads. So when we're downloading, it's kind of like it really shouldn't, who cares? If you don't like DMoss's poetry, I used to get on the stage and say, well, some of y'all may like it and some of y'all won't. That right there. And I tell people, some of y'all may like it, some of y'all won't. It's not for everybody. So I say that to say I totally get what you talk about with intention, connection, the ritualistic purpose, the spirituality play that people don't talk about. It's like the missing ingredient in every conversation, every social political conversation I have. No one brings up spirituality. What is spirituality? Right. It's just that human connection. That's reassuring ourselves or reminding ourselves that we're a part of the greater ecosystem. But I digress.
No. But that's completely tied in. You see, I come from a tradition musically. My mentors, the people that mentored me, because we are products of who we interact with. Everything you change, everything you touch, you change, and everything you change changes you. I come from an era, growing up in Springfield, Massachusetts, right up the road when I was a kid and getting into jazz, right up the road at UMass Amherst. On faculty were the great Max Roach, the great Dr. Billy Taylor, the great Dr. Yusef Lateef, the great Reggie Workman, right, and the great Archie Shepp. 5 giants of Black classical music who are also scholars. They were scholars and they were warriors and they were artists. And so I learned from interfacing with people at that level that resonated with me, that there are people who are on this planet to not only do their art, but to also be able to create a philosophical framework, an ideological framework, because music is such a spiritual thing. For me, music is church. Music is the ritual. So everything has to have some type of ideological framework. And so music is no different. And so those were the people that affected me. They might not have touched other people on that level. They touched me on that level, because for me, it was really important growing up to see 5 brilliant Black men who were amazing musicians who said, I'm not your step and fetch. I'm also a scholar. And I'm also gonna go up one side of you and down the other intellectually, not just musically. I'm not just gonna entertain you. I'm gonna tell you about yourself. I think that was really important.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we have 15 minutes left.
All right.
Trying to get it all in. I still got 2 tracks I want to be able to play.
All right.
I have some questions. I'm gonna skip a section. Let's talk about Sanctuary. Nah. All right. You've been committed to both innovation and cultural preservation. I know I'm familiar with your work. You've been doing that for a long time, as Donald Trump would say, a long time.
Yeah, long time.
How do you balance those two powerful forces in terms of innovation and cultural preservation?
Yeah. All right. So I'll try to make this as short as possible because this could take up the next half hour. So innovation and cultural preservation for me are two wings of the same bird, right? And I use that imagery really intentionally because, you know, the idea of Sankofa for me is very, very, very central to my work. It's the idea that, people say it lots of different ways. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you come from. Sankofa, for those who don't know, is this idea of going back and getting things, right? Going back and getting it. So maybe going back and getting information that was stolen, that was lost, whatever the case may be, recuperating that information, which can be looked at as maybe the missing building blocks that you don't have in your foundation. And so when we think about cultural preservation can also be an act of innovation because as we go back and we get this information, we come to new realizations about what we're doing. Maybe at first we are just the artist who's interested in playing and entertaining people. But we go back and we have some revelation based upon new information that's presented, and we are able for the first time to say, wait, this music is more than that, and it shifts our direction. So when I think about cultural preservation, I don't just think about keeping things the same. I think about expanding an existing art form versus the idea that capitalism would give us to throw things away, right? It's old, we don't need it anymore, throw it away. Preserving something doesn't mean that we're necessarily creating a static object or a static art form. It can also mean that we are building on that existing art form, and we begin to think about how we can infuse it with new information in order to keep it alive. So it's the idea of evolution within the idea of cultural preservation. So hip hop, for instance, is one of those things. When people started sampling records, there were people who thought that was sacrilegious. What are you doing? You're sampling records. That's not music. That was the innovation of individuals saying, no, it was innovation in two forms. One, innovation in the sense of obviously the art form, right? Nobody's doing this before. But then it's also innovative in the sense that it's a process of cultural encoding. We're preserving information within a new creation so that down the line, if this old art form is wiped away, if records disappear, if this music is silenced in this new art form, the next generation that comes along will be able to decipher this information, right? Mm. And so I think that it's true of jazz, it's true of the blues, it's true of hip hop and hip hop culture in general. And when we see the ways in which people around the world then take this information and they use it within their own cultural context, you go to Taiwan and people are rapping in Taiwanese. You go to Palestine and people are rapping against imperialism. People are using the art form.
And it's interesting. They use the art form. They love the rhythm.
Right.
When you talk about cultural preservation, they love the rhythm.
Right.
But they love that. They hate the actual blues of our culture. There's a
Right.
difference. I mean, I love that jazz resonated throughout the world. You know, artists were able to go to France, they'd go everywhere else, and they'd make their money. They, you know, certain types of music in America, black music, is
Right.
rebellion music. You talk
Right.
about hip hop and sampling. Some people thought it was, oh my God, sacrilegious. But
Right.
other people thought it was amazing because you had little kids who couldn't afford guitars, pianos, drum sets, and they found ways to make music. And I just, as we talk about cultural preservation, it's not just the music. I think
No.
thought process, and I heard you say it earlier, the thought process behind the music
Right.
is just as important as the music itself.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're not. It's like you're preserving the audio, but you're not preserving the innovation, the creativity, the fact that they had to do it in the dark so no one would know. Or when
Right.
people suppressed them and told them you couldn't do A, B, and C, they did
Right.
D, E. You know, and that's the innovation. That's the growth.
Yeah.
Whether yeah, and I don't
Guru.
think they cared whether the rest of the, and there's some enthusiasts who can care less if the rest of the world like it
Right.
because they've stripped the spirituality out
That's
of hip
true.
hop.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No. 100%.
So
100%. But I think about someone like Guru, right? I think about how brilliant Guru was when he put Jazzmatazz together because
mhm.
he was preserving the legacy of people like Donald Byrd and Miles Davis and all these people when he was rapping over these jazz records. And of course, Guru was one of those individuals who was brilliant, so he could also give you the ideological, the historical context, right, of where this music was coming from. A Chuck D, a KRS-One, right? Individuals who had that. And yes, you're right. In other places in the world, it's just the aesthetic, right? It's just the aesthetic. It's not the deep spiritual, but there are places, you know, I was in Germany in the last time in 2022, and this old guy took me down to a cave. It was a tunnel in the middle of Dresden, Germany, East Germany, right? And said, "Look at this." And he shows me this whole jazz club where since the 50s, people, you know, and during the time of the before the wall came down, people would go into these caverns and pay and listen to jazz, and it was the inspiration for the rebellion, right, against the division of Germany, right, against the communist regime in East Germany. And so I think that, again, people take from things what they are able to take based upon their level of consciousness. But at the same time, you're 100% right. People can, in fact, see, because I believe that two things can exist in the same space. You can have a person who loves something, but they only love it at their level of consciousness, but they may not be aware of how they've also digested the philosophy of white supremacy, and so they exoticize they exoticize the music or fetishize the music. So Josephine Baker, for instance, is celebrated in France, but in the time while she was alive, she was fetishized, right? She was an object of white supremacist fetishizing of the Black female body. Is that true of the current generation? Who knows, right? I don't talk to
Absolutely.
enough.
Look
Right.
at you look at the United States and look at the number of young whites who voted for Donald Trump in that administration. You look at the
That's
number
right.
of young white people who are probably more racist than they were back when I was a kid growing up in the 60s and 70s. But they grew
Who
up
may
on,
be listening to Black music every day.
they grew up on hip hop, Michael Jordan, Dr. J, LeBron
Right.
James. They grew up, you know, again, loving the rhythm, hating the blues.
Hating the blues.
So, I mean, that's everything you said completely explains the racial divide in America. We
Yeah.
love what they do. They love LeBron. They fetishize his body, his athletic, you know, everything that he does. But at the same time, if he kneels the way, kneels the way those football players do, they tell him to shut up and dribble, shut up and
Right.
shoot.
Right.
You know, so
I
we're
mean,
talking about
Spike Lee
this.
talked about it years ago in Do the Right Thing, right?
Yeah.
This really famous scene where he's sitting there with Pino, I think the guy's name was in the movie, and says, "Who's your favorite artist?" He says, "Prince." And who's your favorite basketball player? Jordan. And he says, "You love us but I mean, you love what we do, but you don't love us, right? And he said, no, it's not like that. They're different. So even how white supremacy and anti-blackness create this idea of exceptionalism, which also affects folks within Black and brown communities who drink the Kool-Aid, right? Who don't understand this idea of positionality, right? And so it can be a really complicated conversation because again, one can say that they hate that George Floyd was murdered, and at the same time still really buy into the idea of a meritocracy, right? In America, to buy into the capitalist, this is the land of opportunity ideology. And so it's really, I think that music is one of the few things that gives us the opportunity at least to have access into people's subconscious thinking.
Absolutely, it absolutely is.
Program.
For the sake of time, I'm going to interrupt you. We got about 3 minutes left.
Oh,
so I got to wrap it, which means I may have to bring you back for a part 2.
I would love to.
And I think you are the epitome of can you really separate the music from it? Some people can come on my show. I've had people come and they only talk about the music.
No.
And it's like, can you really separate the music from who you are, what you think, and what you believe?
No.
And again, I think people really need to support your project, because I think your project, just listening to it, everything about it encompasses everything we've talked about. The Healing Suite, ladies and gentlemen, is out. It's on all platforms.
Yes.
Heshima isn't just a brilliant mind. He's also a brilliant performer, writer, producer. If you hear the sound of my voice at some point, please go and support this brother's music. If he tours or performs in your area, go check him out. He's a type of, I don't even like calling you an entertainer. He's the artist you can actually stop and have a cup of coffee and have a dope, deep conversation.
You buy me a cup of coffee, I'll talk your ear off.
And just no crackers and peanut butter and no pancakes.
Oh God, yeah, I had
Inside joke.
I had my fill back in the day.
So man, I want to thank you for coming on. I didn't get a chance to play your other tracks, but we will be playing them during the week with during the intermission with other guests. So I support your project. I think it's amazing. Yeah, we're gonna push the word out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you, everybody who's been tuning in and listening. And I hope to meet all of you somewhere on the road at some point.
And in this last 35 seconds, tell everybody your social media. How can they follow
you? So you can follow me on my website at HeshimaMoja.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Heshima Moja Official. And you can follow me on Facebook at I Am Heshima. LinkedIn, TikTok is the Mojastic one, right? So please follow me on social media. And I actually talk to people, I engage with people. So you know what? You write me a message, it's going to be me writing you back. So please, I welcome the engagement.
All right. With that being said, Heshima, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you.
Thank you, brother.
All right. This is DMoss, last page, and we out.